Hey, everybody. Welcome to We Gotta Talk. I'm so glad that you're here. If you're watching live, hi. It's been a while. I'm trying to get the schedule around doing more of these live conversations and interviews because it is so fun when people pop on and leave thoughts and questions. And today's guest is coming on at a very deliberate time in the calendar. Our guest today is not only an author, but she's also a holistic life coach and speaker. And her whole platform is about alcohol-free living. Amanda Kuda wrote the book Unbottled Potential, which is a guide to living alcohol-free. It's designed to help people who are alcohol-free curious. Maybe you've started down that pathway already, or maybe you're finding that your relationship with alcohol just isn't what you think it should be. So we're here to talk, especially leading into the holidays, about how complicated someone's relationship with alcohol can be and how to make a turn for the better if this is something that you struggle with. So Amanda, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, I'm so excited to chat and speak with you and your audience this afternoon.
We scheduled this because the holidays are a really difficult time. So many social engagements, Amanda, whether you're, staying put in your hometown or traveling to see people and celebrate, the temptation of alcohol is everywhere. I want to know how this became your thing.
On complete accident, to be honest.
Really?
I never wanted this to be my thing. I, of course, thought I would be doing something when I transferred into the world of personal development. I thought that this was such a great space. I had really been inspired in my late 20s to start working on my mental and spiritual health after a lot of things just kind of erupted into me having what I would classify as an existential crisis. And I remember at that point in my life really starting to just throw spaghetti at the wall in terms of personal and spiritual wellness. And so I was doing all of the things any textbook would tell you to do. I was, reading self-help, meditating. I was doing the affirmations. I was working out. I was doing yoga. I was doing everything you could think of. And I had added so many positive habits to my life. I just couldn't fathom why I wasn't living this miraculous life that I was reading about in all of the self-help books. I thought, am I doomed for failure? Is something wrong with me? And at that point in my life, I think the important thing to note is, I was a young, and I'm still a young single woman, that I was, especially in those formative years where my social life was such a high priority, that even though I was really checking the boxes throughout the week, on the weekend, I kind of switched paths and went from work hard to play hard. And I was a happy hour, girl about town, boozy brunch, Sunday fun day type person. And what I came to understand is that at the end of the day, I had spent all of this time front loading my week with these positive behaviors only to kind of cancel them out on the weekend, if not put myself in a deficit. So every Monday, I was going back into the work week at a deficit and really struggling to get everything back in order. And even though my relationship with alcohol was nothing out of line or nothing abnormal, I started to realize that maybe it was the thing that was kind of tipping the scales in the wrong direction, which is how I started to get curious about alcohol-free living, which is now what I teach with the world.
I think people have the wrong impression that to be alcohol-free or to be living alcohol-free means you had to have had an issue with alcohol or struggle with your sobriety in relation to alcohol. Can you disabuse us of that notion, please?
Absolutely. One of the first lines in my book is that you don't need to have a problem with alcohol for it to be a problem in your life. And I think that that's what kept me stuck for so long, because I had seen the world of addiction and recovery up close. And I knew what addiction looked like, but I figured, like, if that wasn't me, then I should just be able to figure alcohol out. It was this thing that was so socially not only acceptable, but expected of a person of my age and kind of social life, that I thought that I would be a social outcast if I didn't drink alcohol, or it would say something about me and my abilities and my willpower. And so I really hesitated to take on an alcohol-free lifestyle or even explore it for the longest time because of the stigma around sobriety, that sobriety equals you've hit a rock bottom, you have a problem, which is totally acceptable. It's absolutely fine, but that's not where I was. So I felt like I needed some sort of permission slip to get into the club. And at the end of the day, the reality is, if there's a habit in your life that is in any way holding you back from the mental well-being, the personal success, the abundance, the connected relationships, the whatever that you desire, it's absolutely a problem and something you should look at.
And it doesn't really take anyone with any actual official history with alcoholism to understand the feeling of waking up the next day and just regretting the amount of alcohol that you took in. And, I think all of us in an honest moment can say, ooh, I remember regretting at least one day or
Yeah.
one morning, when I took too much in. It's funny though. I'm 43 now. I grew up like, you know, before social media was a real thing, before people were chronicling their lives on Instagram or Facebook or any other platform. But I do think that movements like this, thankfully, are gaining steam because of the world we live in. Whereas back in the day, you would just wake up and go to the greasy spoon, go to the diner and just like eat off your hangover and just call it a day. Now people can be like, oh, you know what? I actually don't have to necessarily feel like this and I can choose. And there are beverages now, great alcohol-free beverages that can make you feel like part of the crowd without feeling like you have to go all in.
I think that this movement has become so accessible over the past, I'm going to say 5 years, really since the pandemic, for better or worse, that people noticed during that lockdown period, they either went one of two ways. One way was, oh, well, I have a period of time where I actually don't have any sort of social obligations. So this is a great time for me to take a break from alcohol. Or two, they went into kind of an emotional spiral where they were stress drinking, because a lot of people are typically social or emotional drinkers. So the social drinkers took a break, the emotional drinkers dove in and then realized, oh, heck, this is a bit more of an issue than I intended it for it to be. And so they started to backpedal and reevaluate. So it created kind of this perfect storm of people having the opportunity to evaluate in a vacuum their relationship with alcohol, and also this social media influx of people having all this time. So they were sharing about their journeys more vulnerably with everything, including, mental health, whatever it is, how to make sourdough, it doesn't matter. People were on social media and you got the opportunity to hear from other people like myself that you don't need to have a problem with alcohol to quit drinking. It's something you can do just for reaching your potential and your personal development. And I think that a lot of people needed that permission slip. And I'm so grateful to be able to be one of the people out there sharing that message so that it can be just a normal thing that you're doing for yourself.
Talk about the distinction between the social drinker and the emotional drinker.
Oof, yes. So we're all a little bit of both, but typically the social drinker is going to be that weekend warrior. You're drinking because you do it to fit in. You do it to like keep yourself kind of hyped up to go out. Maybe you need a little extra energy. Maybe you're a little introverted. Maybe you're a little anxious. And you need it to feel like you can be conversational and cool and bubbly and whatever else you intend to be when you go out. And then the emotional drinker or the stress drinker tends to drink a little bit throughout the week. And it's really as a way to wind down at the end of the day or at the end of the evening. It's a way to, for a lot of women, it's women who are go, go, go. They're very high achieving. They're very capable, but that means their mind is always on. They're always jumping from one thing to another and trying to be hyper vigilant and trying to be ahead of everything. And at the end of the day, they just want to shut it all off. And instead of having tools to do that, they turn to something that seemingly does the trick. But the problem is that it is creating more anxiety and more of a spiral the next day and putting you again kind of in that deficit state. So you have people who are drinking for those social reasons more on the weekend, and then the people who are doing it in lighter doses throughout the week just to kind of manage anxiety, stress, overwhelm, what have you.
Have you done any research? I know your book sort of touches on some guidelines for people, but I'm curious how much you got into the research of the brain of the alcoholic person and how much. And I know we're making the distinction here, guys. This is not like only for alcoholics. This is people who want to live without alcohol. But I'm asking the question if research has shown any distinction in the brain or what is making people be the person who needs the alcohol to get through the day versus the person who wants to have the alcohol. Did you get into any of that research for your book?
So I didn't do any research on the brain. Amen Clinics, Dr. Amen, Daniel Amen does a lot of really great research on this topic. And I love watching his videos on it. But to be forthcoming, if you don't know, I'm not a doctor or a scientist. So I'm going to give you the more of the qualitative evaluation that I've seen is that people who often people who want to drink, I'm using quote fingers,
Right.
they also feel like in a secret way they need to drink. And so I think especially I'm going to speak more specifically to women because I imagine that's who both of you and I speak to on the greater basis, is that we live in this world where there's a couple things happening that a lot of women are actually really highly sensitive. And so they have you know, they're overwhelmed or they get overstimulated easily. Maybe they are on the neurodivergent spectrum and they didn't get diagnosed until later in life. Maybe they're just someone who is incredibly empathic because, first of all, many women are, but we're also encouraged to be incredibly empathic. And so all of these emotional things pile up as an emotional burden if you have not been taught to manage your emotions. And you start to use alcohol as a way to kind of disconnect and numb out to where maybe you're not thinking about, oh, how is that person across the room doing? Do I need to be looking out for them, or do I need to be managing their emotions or doing something to make them more comfortable? We just want to kind of escape for a second. And so there's this sense of we've been going and being hypervigilant all throughout our day, and we just want something to shut that brain mechanism down or slow it down. And while we could learn to do that on our own, a lot of times we're looking to alcohol. So even if we say we do it for fun or because we want to, at the end of the day, usually we're drinking alcohol because we want to be more of an emotional state that's considered productive or positive. So we want to be more fun, more engaging, more outgoing, or we want to be less of an emotional state that we consider not appealing. So we want to be less anxious, less boring, less tired. And when you're always approaching engaging with a substance from that subtle need, it becomes a little dangerous because you're saying to yourself subtly, you can't do this on your own. You're not capable of calming down. You're not capable of socializing. And it's frankly not true, but we start to believe it when we've used a tool outside of ourselves for so long to get to those states.
Yeah, it's a bit of a security blanket of sorts.
For sure.
Even the exercise of holding, so like sometimes I'm at a party and I'm just standing there talking and my hands are down and I'm like, this is weird. You know,
You just need something.
You want something so you can like take a break, a pause from conversation. So I can see why it becomes a crutch in more ways than just the actual physical feeling that you get when you drink. Why does alcohol in the long term inhibit us? Because in the short term, it greases the wheels. A lot of people seem to have positive, at least after the first couple of drinks, social interactions. It allows us to speak more freely and feel more comfortable. But inevitably, unless you're a super person, it ends up inhibiting us, whether it's in the short term, i.e. the hangover, or the long term, which is navigating what you just described, which are complicated relationships with alcohol. What is it about alcohol that ends up inhibiting us?
Yeah, well, it changes the way that your brain functions and the way that your brain handles adversity. And it's not even just during that period where you're feeling a little hungover and sluggish and gray. If you are drinking at a frequent and consistent basis, even if not, you wouldn't say heavily, even if you're that nightly one glass of wine every night, that means you're always going to have some sort of like residual effect of alcohol in your body. And in your brain specifically, it changes the way we handle adversity. It makes you less capable because it's basically like you're cheating a little bit all of the time. And so when you start to learn, it's kind of like you've been bowling with the bumpers and the gutters, right? And yeah, you're probably going to bowl a pretty good game if you have something like keeping you from hitting the highs and lows of those gutter boundaries. But at the end of the day, if you really want to learn how to properly bowl, you need to do it with your own mind and your own capabilities. And that's kind of how alcohol does us, is that it convinces us that we're handling life and we're going through, we're managing this adversity or this stress or this anxiety, but really we're just kind of cheating our way through it. And so the great thing is that your brain, the process of neuroplasticity exists. And so you're able to retrain yourself to handle adversity in a different way. You just have to give yourself the chance to do that. But over time, what you'll find is that the things that cause you anxiety and stress, if you find actual real solutions to them, they're going to not trigger you as fully as they had in the past. You're going to bounce back much more quickly.
What is one of the top complaints you hear working with people? And I know you deal a lot one-on-one. So what are they coming to you say, Amanda, this is, I don't know, I did something really embarrassing. I don't What is the number one thing that they come to you and say?
I think that, when they're trying to quit or when they know they want to quit alcohol.
When they want to quit, when they're ready to be like, hey, I'm working with Amanda. I found your book or I found your Instagram page. Like, I'm ready to quit. And this is why. What is the why?
I think the underlying thing is they've started to sense, and they can't put their finger on it, but that there is something more out there for them, that there's something better, that they can't quite scratch the itch with alcohol in the way. And while, again, their relationship with alcohol wouldn't be called problematic or abnormal, they've started to sense that it is the thing that is keeping them from the life that they want. And they're willing to do something a little bizarre and a little a little out there in our society that revolves around booze in order to get that thing that they want. And a lot of times it's personal fulfillment, it's relationship, it's career, it's all of these things that they're just so close to it, they can't quite grasp it exactly in the way they want.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I have noticed too that more people are toying with this idea. I mean, again, just watching trends on social media or even seeing the abundance of non-alcoholic drinks now available, whether it's, a CBD drink or whether it's no sort of active ingredient. I mean, like just a great mocktail. Like
Mhm.
it's definitely gaining steam. Why do you think people want this? Is this part of the health boom that we're experiencing, or is this the end of a bit of an era when social drinking defined so many people's lives?
I think it is a little bit of the end of an era, but also an era of options. So you were saying earlier and just now about all of these non-alcoholic options. The non-alcoholic industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry now, and
Yeah.
alcohol brands have started to catch on. They've started to develop their own non-alcoholic brands, or they started to buy up some of these niche brands because people have decided, hey, I don't need or want alcohol. And some of them are people, like kind of more in our generation. And
Mhm.
then the younger generation are also, they're not drinking as much. That doesn't mean they're not using substance. I'm not
Yeah.
going to say anything specific, but I think that it has started to become a less appealing form of escapism than it was before. It's not going away by any means. But I think that people have started to want for other options, or maybe even just drinking less and having an option that's non-alcoholic.
What are your go-to drinks then when you're going out now?
Ooh, I think that one of the great things is that almost every place I've been to has a non-alcoholic beer. And so that's super accessible. Athletic Brewing makes a really awesome non-alcoholic beer that you absolutely can't tell the difference with.
Wow.
I think that it's really impressive. And then I just love a really nicely crafted alcohol-free mocktail, non-alcoholic cocktail. And it's so different from, maybe when you and I were coming of age in the drinking world, where it was just like a Shirley Temple or something, like a
Yeah.
non-alcoholic margarita that was basically a sugar drink and not very tasty. These are very sophisticated drinks that have really, really interesting flavor profiles. I really love the folks at Seedlip. They make a really interesting kind of liqueur replacement. And I just think
Mhm.
that it's fascinating what people are able to do with these flavors and make these really tasty drinks that allow you to have something kind of like you said, just to fidget with and hold in your hand.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's the practice of it too. And you were talking about, social crutches, for lack of a better term, earlier,
Mhm.
which I do think the reason a lot of people fall back on drinking as an option at parties is because it's just what you do. But the physicality of it, it's what
Mhm.
smokers say about cigarettes. It's the
Yep.
movement of the hand. It's something. You mentioned something earlier too, and this piqued my curiosity about people who in adulthood are finding out that they're neurodivergent in some way, especially being a group of people who have come to push alcohol out of their lives. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What specifically are you hearing from that group?
Oh, yeah. So I'm hearing that a lot of people, a lot of women specifically, who are late diagnosis neurodivergent, ADHD, they have had complicated relationships with alcohol.
Wow.
And
I was going to
oh,
say, what's the association? Did you do any looking
so
into?
it's first of all just kind of feeling abnormal their entire lives and feeling
Hmm.
kind of weird socializing, or that they want a permission slip to be this more outgoing version of themselves. And alcohol either gives you that permission slip or
Hmm.
quiets the anxiety. And so it has like kind of the best of the both worlds effects. But then if you are neurodivergent, having anything screwing with your brain chemistry is no bueno. So
Yeah.
they started to realize, or I have ADHD, so I really felt this, that I just wanted to be able to use my whole brain in its most
Right.
effective state, and being hungover was not it, and even being
Yeah.
fuzzy and foggy wasn't it. So I actually work with a lot of people who are diagnosed some sort of neurodivergence, and being alcohol free really is helpful to them in order to like really lean into that as a superpower versus something that's holding them back.
I joke all the time on the podcast how my OCD is my greatest drawback and
Mhm.
my biggest superpower. And I
Yes.
only recently was told that I have this within the past 2 years. That's a trip in and of itself to realize like, oh, this makes a lot of sense.
Things are clicking.
Things are clicking. We like the superpower side. We don't like the downside. So what do you predict then? Not only specifically in like, say the manufacturing side of things, i.e. more businesses rising to meet the demands of the alcohol-free world, but what else do you predict on the human side of things too? Do you think this is something that will continue to catch on? And I guess a follow-up question would be, and again, we're not speaking for the entire sort of class of potentially impairing things like drugs. We can't get into all of it. But do you think more people will be living without alcohol specifically down the line?
I think that more people will be living without it or really working to limit it and be more mindful in their intake. I think, to pull from one of my peers, Holly Whitaker, she wrote a book called Quit Like a Woman. She talks about how alcohol is having a cigarette moment. And we're starting to get turned on to the fact that, hey, this is not a classy thing that's just okay for you. There are going to be repercussions and you need to be aware of them. And people have started to kind of look at it as a little less highbrow, just like we did with cigarettes. And I think that it's going to you're going to start to see some of the same results, that people are edging back from it a bit.
Yeah, it's so interesting even seeing the trends on the advertising side of things, watching how smoking was glamorized for decades, and it was part of how a chic woman behaved at a party.
Yes.
I am curious to see how even spaces like that catch up with this, because I do think the more people that are doing what you do will lend more credence to the people choosing to live alcohol free. You make it look good, and that's unfortunately or fortunately a part of the assessment that a lot of people make when making these decisions.
Absolutely. And I think that, I grew up in an era where my idol was Carrie Bradshaw. And what did Carrie always have in her hand? A martini.
Yes,
And
Cosmo.
exactly. And so I had this image of what a glamorous woman looked like. And now part of my work and the other people who are in this field is to glamorize an alcohol-free life and make that feel appealing, because it can be just as fun and as sexy and as glamorous as drinking, if not more. And you don't have to deal with any of the repercussions. It's not as easy. It's not as quick of a fix, but it feels really powerful when you kind of master it and get in your groove.
Yeah. Did you have a rock bottom moment, again, knowing that this wasn't alcohol per se that you were dealing with, but did you have a rock bottom moment that made you specifically decide, okay, this is the moment where I'm done?
No, I think I had a lot of soft bottoms though, where it was this again, and is this ever going to change? And wow, I'm never drinking again. This hangover is terrible. I meant to only have 2 drinks and I had too many. And all of these moments where I just kept feeling like it was a hamster wheel and I was tired of being on it. So it wasn't so much a bottom as wow, I'm just exhausted by this Groundhog Day. And if I have to make a change to get off this repetitive thing that never seems to stop, then I'm going to do it. And not that there weren't bad times, but luckily there wasn't anything like detrimental and terrible that caused me to change my mind. It was just, I got tired of my own crap.
Yeah. I mean, listen, and like I said earlier in the interview, it doesn't take you being an alcoholic to wake up after drinking and be like, I never want to do this again. I mean, I drink 1 drink, Amanda, 1, and I am drunk. That is how infrequently I socially drink. And it is both the best feeling, because I'm like, wow, this is great. I'm a really cheap date. And on the other hand, I'm like, this is why I don't, even with 1 drink, I just, to say nothing of, the how you look the next day and how you feel, it's not good. I'm curious how your work or studies under Marianne Williamson and Gabrielle Bernstein kind of informed this work. You sort of inhabit a really interesting space where we're talking things that are physical, like health, things that can be quantified, but we're also talking about a side of a lot of us that's very spiritual or very in touch and in tune and intuitive. So how does work like that play into the alcohol-free world?
I find that the crossover between people who are sober curious and spiritually curious is actually quite profound. And I started out on the spiritually curious side. I was coming into kind of my spiritual awakening, and I got introduced to some of the more new age spiritual teachers like Marianne, like Gabrielle. And I really just started to feel inspired and empowered. There was something in my soul that said, yes, this is it. And by the way, I lived in the Bible Belt and had grown up in the Bible Belt. So my version of what it looked like to be spiritual was very, very strict religion. And so being introduced to this world where spirituality wasn't all damning or wasn't judgmental or wasn't shameful, it was powerful and you could kind of pick what felt good to you. And it was
Right.
about an all loving God or power or universe or spirit, whatever you want to call that higher power. That felt really inspiring. And so I really started to study and dive deep into the world of New Age spirituality. And I found that my desire to be in that moment where I could be one with my body, one with my intuition, one with spirit, was being really, really diluted with drinking, and that it just didn't jive. And so at the end of the day, I realized I wanted for that spiritual connection. I wanted for that sense of ease and grace enough that, again, I was willing to give up something that I was told I needed to and deserved to have.
What do you think, now that you've done some studying, and I know that there's a different way of interpreting a lot of these spiritual teachings, but is there like some sort of energetic block that alcohol creates? We know that it impairs judgment on the actual physiological, psychological level, right? There's been plenty of science. There's been plenty of science and studies that show that. But spiritually, and again, just based on what you learned, is there some like channel we're blocking? Is it like, I'm just, from that's the actual like spirituality, what is it?
This is my favorite thing to talk about because alcohol is an energetic substance. Everything we interact with has energy, and you're either going to deplete your energy or increase your energy depending upon who and what you interact with. And unfortunately, the interaction with alcohol is always going to be negative. And I kind of like to look at it like you always have a connection to the higher power, to your intuition, to whatever you want to call that. And connecting to it with alcohol in the picture is like driving through a tunnel and trying to talk on a cell phone. It's just going to be fuzzy. It's not going to work the same as if you're out in the wide open and you have a great connection. Like, that's the difference. And I personally was tired of feeling that fuzzy connection. And by the way, it also influences your ability to manifest, if you want to get into that part of energetics and metaphysics. But just in general, the connection to spirit, universe, source, whatever, is impaired when you have alcohol in the picture because it just makes it kind of fuzzy and foggy.
What have you experienced in that realm in particular? Maybe something that has growth in the positive direction since leaving alcohol behind as it relates to your spirituality. What are some things you've personally noticed, or maybe your clients have noticed?
Yeah, I think in general, it's just the connection to intuition and your inner guidance system, your own internal sense of knowing. When I was a drinker, I felt very run, kind of sheep herd mentality. Like, I have to do what everyone else is doing. I have to phone a friend if I'm going to make any sort of decisions. I just felt anxious. And while that seems like more of a psychological thing, once I started to be in touch with my intuition and I had this just internal sense of knowing what I wanted and needed, it just made life so much more easeful. And I also found that when I stopped drinking and I was really working on my spiritual connection, I was also working on my personal development, my self-esteem, and my clients see this too, that once you raise your level of self-esteem and you also raise your energetic vibration, which is what happens when alcohol is out of the picture, you're just going to attract higher vibe people, experiences, abundance, whatever, into your life with greater ease. Because, you know, there's the very kind of trite phrase, your vibe attracts your tribe. And if you are vibrating at a lower frequency, which I can explain in deeper detail, I think people get it in general. If you've downgraded your vibration, you're just not going to attract as high quality experiences and people. And that was something I think that was a very eye-opening reality when I started to really easily call in things that, and when I say call in, I mean, get the opportunity to experience different jobs, windfalls of money, people and friendships that I had never been able to have access to before. When this just started showing up, I thought, wow, I must be onto something, which is when I really started to study energetics and metaphysics and manifestation and found a huge correlation.
What type of spiritual practice do you work in tandem with then? Obviously alcohol-free living sort of
Mhm.
plays into the clarity of mind, but like just as a sort of a side question and side note, what spiritual practice are you seeing the most results from, whether that's things manifesting to you or an inner peace? Like what's your spiritual practice?
Mm. Oh, well, I have a ton. I, really just eat off the spiritual buffet and find what works for me. But I think that the one that is the most profound is journaling. And journaling a lot, especially in terms of what you desire and what you want to release, and using that kind of as part of your prayer practice. So if you're
Yeah.
not someone who feels comfortable, praying verbally, writing those journal entries as prayers to the universe. Dear universe, this is what I'm willing to release. Help me
Mm,
to do this. And dear universe, this is what I'm, trying to call in or attract in my life. Show me how to do that. And just having that, first of all, is cathartic because it gets that out of your head and onto paper. And
right.
so it's a stress relieving activity, but it's also kind of like you're placing an order with spirit or source, and you
Yeah.
have tangible proof of it that you've written it down. So it relieves your stress. But then when something happens that you've been waiting for, that you've been asking for and writing for and journaling about, you also get that kind of placebo effect, or not even placebo effect, that just energizing effect of, oh, I asked for this. I set an intention around this, and now it's so. I made that happen in some way. It feels really good. It's very self-affirming to see something come to fruition like that.
That's cool. It's good to know too that I would imagine you bring an element of this into your work with your clients too, right?
Mhm.
So
Oh,
if they
absolutely.
were wanting to not only eliminate something but bring something into that space to fill them, that this is something that you could work on them, work with
Absolutely.
them on. Yeah.
This is one of the main tenets of the work that I do. And I think what kind of differentiates me in the alcohol-free space is I really take that open spiritual focus. And
Hmm.
I think that if you're going to remove something from your life that's been a crutch, if you don't replace it with something that also can help you alleviate pain and stress and whatever, then you're going to fall right back into the same space
Yeah.
before, because then you're not going to have any tools and coping mechanisms. And even if, though it's a little ethereal, spirituality can be a great coping mechanism and a way to relieve stress and a way to become more centered, in a practical way that works long term, as opposed to alcohol, which does not and typically has some sort of negative boomerang effect.
Yeah, speaking of negative boomerang effect, we have to talk about the impact of alcohol in relationships. I
Mm,
mean, you don't need to be a doctor. Everybody's had the worst alcohol-induced or fueled fight with their
uh-huh.
partner or their best friend. I feel like the only good relationship that comes out of alcohol is the people you meet in the bathroom, drunk at a bar in a club, and you're
Yeah.
like best friends for 4 minutes.
Yep. Instant camaraderie, get a little
Right,
serotonin, or
right.
whatever boost.
Right, and that's probably it. So talk about, the impact of alcohol-free living on relationships and how that works.
Absolutely. I think that the thing that's so interesting about the relationships that we gain as a drinker, and this is a broad analysis across the board, just what I've seen in my own life and observed in the lives of others, that the relationships that we develop as a drinker, we start to get afraid. Oh, will people still want to hang out with me? Will people still want to be my friend? Will I be a social outcast? Will people start avoiding me and stop inviting me? And at the end of
Mhm,
the day, there is no solid relationship that's built upon a liquid bond. So if alcohol is the glue that's
mm,
holding your relationship together, then I have to tell you the news that that's probably not a very strong relationship. And while
yeah,
that might suck to hear, because maybe those are relationships that you've had since college or high school or whatever, if your common thing is alcohol, then you probably really you need to reconsider, is that a relationship that is bringing value to my life? Because true
mhm,
relationships are built on connection, vulnerability, authenticity. And not that you can't have those things in a relationship that involves alcohol, but typically what I find is those relationships are based on convenience, surface level things, gossip, things that aren't really true connection. They're kind of pseudo connection. And once you take a step back and evaluate what's happening, what you realize is that, oh, the relationships that I have right now aren't that great. And I either
mhm.
have to repair and strengthen them or be willing to let them go. So I know that kind of is a broader answer to the question that you asked, because we can talk about how relationships suffer because of alcohol, and all of it affects it in so many ways.
Right.
But I think the way that people most are afraid of is that it's going to affect their friendship and their ability to find and have friendship.
Yeah.
And it actually couldn't be further from the truth, that it actually impairs your ability to be close with someone.
What about the romantic relationships? I'm curious, the people that you work with, what they come back to you reporting, changes in marriages, boyfriend,
Mhm.
girlfriends, partners, how are they interacting differently with their partners after choosing the alcohol-free living path?
Yeah. This is a very interesting one because across the board, it is all over the place. If they
Hmm.
have a not so great relationship with their partner and maybe they've been using alcohol to dull that down, usually what we see is that is magnified with alcohol out of the picture and they start to really have a wake up
Yeah.
call of the validity of that relationship and what they want out of it long term. If the relationship is already good and supportive, typically we see that it just starts to soar even more, that the communication increases, the intimacy increases. But then there's the kind of wonky space where if your partner has a relationship with alcohol, and we never want to ask our partner to change for us.
Right.
This is a journey that we're on ourselves. We need to figure it out and do it ourselves. A lot of times your partner will come along with you, but sometimes the thing that happens is it also creates distance because maybe that partner, what we're realizing is they drink a little more than we were aware of and
Mm.
they're not willing to make a change. I think that one is more rare that I see. More typically what I see is that the partner continues to drink, but it's not distracting. And it's not something that they're, putting a lot of peer pressure on the partner who's quitting drinking. And so typically what happens is that other partner slows down in their drinking as well. And you end up being a positive influence. But oh my goodness, it's all across the board. And it's a really important thing, just like I said with friendships, that if alcohol was the bond that was holding you together, that's probably not a very strong bond. And so we really need to do some deep thinking there.
Yeah. And like you said, if this is someone who's running from you when you're making decisions in your best interest, then maybe that's reason alone to reassess the relationship, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I know you work with people across sort of all industries, but is there a common thread besides realizing or hitting, whether it be a rock bottom moment or a collection of moments like you personally described? What is the other thread? Any other thread that connects all these people that you're working with and sort of speaking to when you're talking about this topic?
Oh, for sure. I find, and this could be nuanced because of the work that I do and the fact that it's rooted in spirituality, that I work with a lot of people who are high achievers. So a lot of women who are go-getters, C-suite executives, they
Hmm.
really have done well for themselves. They're checking all of the boxes.
Hmm.
So no one, including themselves, would ever think that there's anything that they could do better, but they sense that alcohol is holding them back. And even more specifically within that, I work with a lot of people that I've kind of named helpers and healers. So people who are in the space of their doctors, they're medical professionals, or they are someone who takes on a lot of stress for their customers. So like an attorney, psychologist, a lot of people who you would think know better,
Hmm.
especially like within the medical field in terms of psychologists, therapists, doctors. But because they have such a high stress career and they spend so much of their day giving and managing other people's emotions, they
Hmm.
hardly have energy to manage their own at the end of the day.
That's interesting. Like the
Mhm.
emotional bandwidth is like all
Yep.
diverting
Extent.
outside. Oh, that's
Yeah.
so funny. Isn't that crazy? You could show up as the best version of yourself for other people all day long, and then
Oh
it
yeah.
comes to like the man in the mirror, and you're like, I can't, I
It's
have
it's
nothing
tale as
left.
old as time. It is a tale as old as time that we are, over empathing like that and self-abandoning, but we can turn it back on for someone in an instant.
Yeah, yeah, I feel like that. I mean, gosh, and women, especially, and motherhood embodies that conundrum. And I mean, even uh, how we show up for people in our lives, our relationships,
Mhm.
whether it's our partner or our friends. There's such an outpouring of that energy toward other people that sometimes we forget that we need that ourselves, which I guess applies to so much more than alcohol-free living.
So much. And that's, I think that some of the work that I do that's very nuanced is that it's not so much about giving up alcohol. It's about how do you set boundaries with yourself and develop other routines that will help you lean into an alcohol free lifestyle. And sometimes that means you have to learn to say no to people and things and say, you know what? It's not the best use of my time to do this. Maybe I can outsource something that I've been taking on as something I have to do because I'm a woman or because whatever reason, or because it's really not that hard. But if it's not within your zone of genius and you have the ability to outsource it or to say no or to
Mhm.
delegate it, then
Mhm.
we need to start doing that so that we're not creating these lives where we have to literally poison ourselves at the end of the day to feel like we're getting any sort of rest, because that's not the life I want anyone to live, but yet that's the role that we've taken on quite frequently and unwittingly.
Yeah. Oh, Amanda, you are doing such interesting work. Tell us about the book Unbottled Potential. I know it was published under an imprint of
Mhm.
Penguin. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's huge.
So it is. Oh my goodness. Thank you for saying that, because if you are an author or have ever wanted to write a book, you know, like what a dream it is to get a book deal. And I was so fortunate to get a great deal with a great publisher. And Unbottled Potential is my first book. And it's all about breaking up with alcohol so that you can break through to your best life. So it's a self-help book at heart, with learning to live alcohol free as the message. And you can get it anywhere books are sold. I have a personal attachment to the audiobook because I got to read it. And I think it's so
That's
nice
cool.
to hear a book in the author's tone and really hear their heart come through. And I think that you can hear some, you hear me get emotional a couple times. And I think that that's really special. So if you're an audiobook person, I'd love for you to check that version out.
I love it. All the audiobooks I listen to, I feel like are narrated by the same woman. And
Oh, really?
I just so many. And there's this like robotic edge to it. And I'm like Googling, is this AI or is this real? So to hear an author's voice feels like a gift, because I keep getting this one narrator and I'm like, maybe it's the version of like, I don't know, Audible that I'm on. Anyway, that's good to know, because I do think there's a life you can breathe into it as the creator of these words that other people probably.
Yeah, I think it's really special. Of course, read the book if you're a book, person who prefers it that way. But you like to listen. I do think it's truly special.
I love that. Amanda, before we wrap here, let us know, obviously we'll check out the book, but connecting with you in the future, if there's someone out there who's interested in perhaps working with you or just keeping an eye on what you're doing, what can we look forward to?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I love to support high achieving, soul centered women who are on this path. And if that feels like you, and you just know that alcohol is no longer serving you and you need a little motivation and a little accountability to get through that, as well as some spiritual and practical tools, you can find me anywhere on the internet. I'm at Amanda Kuda, and that's spelled Kuda. And I love to connect on Instagram. I'm very active there, and on some of the other social channels, TikTok, but Instagram is my primary home. So if you just want to lurk around there and say hello, I'd love to have you.
Wonderful. Amanda, thank you for spending time with me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh,
I'm going
I'm so
to
glad.
have you stand by for just a second. We're going to wrap up on the live stream and get back to regularly scheduled programming. But guys, if you were watching live, thank you so much. If you want to connect with Amanda, I'll put everything in show notes. You can check out our website. You can get a direct link to the book. But I really believe in what she's doing. And, I feel like even if this is not something you, like Amanda was saying, struggle with, or it's not playing some central role in your life, chances are you know someone who might be better served, let's just put it that way, by getting rid of that sort of part of their social lives. So please encourage them to listen to this conversation. As always, this is a judgment-free zone, but I love to bring on guests that sort of provoke us to think in new directions. And Amanda is 100% that guest. Again, thank you so much for joining me. Rate, review, do all the things. That means a tremendous deal to me. And we'll see you next week on We Gotta Talk with some more good stuff. Bye.